That Friday night was the most intense and unforgettable night of my life. Their house was so quiet and peaceful that I felt a rare sense of calm. I was exhausted from a long week and just wanted to sleep. As I lay down, I thought nothing could disturb the quiet of the night. I had been a single mother for 8 years since my divorce. My ex-husband and I didn't have a bad relationship. We just grew apart. Raising my son Daniel alone was the most rewarding and challenging. In my entire life, he was everything to me: smart, funny, and kind. But it was tough being both his mother and father that night. I was so tired that I barely had the energy to put on my pajamas before falling into bed. Their house was silent. Daniel had gone to bed hours earlier after playing video games and doing his homework. Finally, I had a moment to myself in my room. The moon shone through the thin curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls. I snuggled under the blanket, enjoying the warmth and letting my mind wander. Life had been calm lately, which was a nice change after a difficult year. Daniel and I had been through a lot together since his father left, but we had built a good life together. Even though Daniel was almost 20 now, we were still very close. He was always a caring and thoughtful person. Sometimes I worried that he took on too much responsibility for someone his age. I smiled as I thought about him. He was so kind, and I felt lucky too. I was happy to have him in my life, but tonight I was too tired to think. I felt heavy and sleepy. Then I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. I woke up a little, thinking it was part of a dream, but the knock came again, gently, and I was fully awake. It was Mom. Daniel's voice was quiet, but it was enough to wake me up. I blinked, trying to focus on the door. I could see Daniel's outline in the dim light coming from the hallway. I sat up, trying to wake up. I got up and was completely awake. "Daniel, what's wrong?" I asked. He paused for a moment before coming into the room and closing the door quietly behind him. He seemed unsure about coming in. "His eyes came here," I said softly, patting the empty space next to me on the bed. "You can stay with me tonight if you want." He hesitated for a moment, then came over and lay down beside me. He was on his side facing me, and I could see how tired he looked in the dim light. He also seemed vulnerable, which was unusual for him. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked gently. Daniel shook his head, his dark hair falling over his eyes. "I just wanted to be close," he said. My heart felt warm. It had been a while since Daniel had wanted to be close to me like this, like when he was younger. I reached out and brushed his hair away from his forehead, smiling at him. "That's okay," I whispered, putting my hand on his shoulder. "You can stay as long as you need." He smiled back, but I could still see something bothering him. I didn't ask him about it. Instead, I lay back down and pulled. The silence enveloped us, and the stillness soothed us. We lay there for a while, basking in the peaceful stillness. Daniel's breathing slowed, and I thought he had fallen asleep. But then he spoke again, so softly I almost couldn't hear him. "Mom, do you ever miss him?" His question surprised me, but I knew he was talking about his father. It was a question I had avoided for years. One I didn't know how to answer. "I do sometimes," I admitted quietly. "Daniel, we have a good relationship, but there are still some things we don't agree on." You know that. He nodded, but I could tell he wanted to know more. "Do you ever think things could have been different?" he asked. I sighed, thinking about past regrets. "Maybe, but we can't change what happened. We have to move forward." Daniel looked down, playing with the edge of the blanket. "I guess I just wonder if maybe I could have done something different. You know, like if I had been better." His words hurt my heart. I sat up and turned to face him. "Daniel, this wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong," I said seriously. He looked away, his voice a whisper. Sometimes it feels like if I had been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left. Tears came to my eyes, and I hugged him tightly. He resisted for a second, but then he hugged me back, burying his face in my shoulder. Daniel, listen to me. Your dad made his own choices. It had nothing to do with you. It was his decision. And it was never your responsibility, Daniel. You've always been more than enough for me. I whispered, my voice filled with love and reassurance. You're everything to me. He nodded against my shoulder, but I could still sense the tension within him. The weight of years of unspoken pain and guilt. We held each other closely, the silence between us a comforting balm. Gradually, his body relaxed, his breathing deepening as he drifted off to sleep. But as he slumbered peacefully beside me, my mind raced. Thoughts and memories swirling in the darkness, we had both endured so much. Yet, amidst the quiet comfort of that shared embrace, an unexpected feeling stirred within me. It was a warmth that spread through my chest and a connection that felt deeper and more intimate than the usual bond between a mother and her son. I tried to dismiss it to focus on the rhythm of his breathing, but the feeling persisted. It was a persistent whisper that refused to be ignored. Morning arrived too soon. The soft light of dawn painting. The room was painted in gentle hues. Daniel slept soundly beside me, his face peaceful and relaxed. The tension of the previous night seemed to have disappeared. I watched him for a moment, my heart swelling with love and pride. Yet that unfamiliar feeling lingered beneath the surface of my maternal affection. I slipped out of bed carefully so as not to disturb him and made my way downstairs to prepare breakfast. The familiar routine of cooking offered a sense of normality, but my thoughts kept returning to our late-night conversation. Daniel had always been sensitive, but I hadn't realized how much his father's absence had affected him. The guilt he carried was a heavy burden on my heart. I wished I could help him with that, but it wasn't just the guilt that lingered in my mind. It was the way he had looked at me, the vulnerability in his eyes, and the unspoken longing for something more. If I was honest with myself, the warmth I had felt while holding him had stirred something deep within me. A connection that went beyond the usual boundaries of family. I tried to push the thought away, reminding myself that he was my son, but the feeling persisted, a persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. Soon Daniel emerged from his slumber, his hair tousled, his lanky frame still bearing the vestiges of adolescence, yet there was a newfound maturity in his eyes, a hint of the man he was becoming. I greeted him with a warm smile, trying to mask the lingering emotions from the night before. "Morning, sleepyhead," I said, placing a plate of pancakes before him. "Morning," he mumbled, settling into his chair and digging into his breakfast. We ate in comfortable silence, the morning light casting a warm glow over the kitchen. I felt his gaze linger on me occasionally, but I chose not to bring up the topic of the previous night. He seemed more at ease and like himself, and I didn't want to disrupt the fragile peace we had found. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that. I saw your vulnerability, and it caught me off guard." "You never have to thank me, Daniel. I'll always be there for you, no matter what." He nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on me, and I could see an unspoken question lingering in the air. I wasn't sure how to respond or how to navigate the subtle shift in our relationship. There was a new intensity in his eyes, a yearning for a connection that transcended the traditional boundaries of mother and son. Part of me, a part one hadn't acknowledged before, felt it too. After breakfast, he lingered at the counter, tracing patterns on the countertop. "Do you ever think things could have been different?" he asked quietly, his voice heavy with unspoken emotions. I sighed, the weight of past regret settling upon me. "Maybe," I replied softly, "but we can't change what happened. All we can do is try to move forward." Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on his restless fingers. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done. Something could have been better, you know. His voice was barely a whisper, laced with guilt and self-reproach. His words pierced my heart, and I couldn't help but reach out to him. I placed a hand on his shoulder, drawing him into a gentle embrace. Daniel, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault, I reassured him. My voice was thick with emotion. He looked away, his voice barely audible. Sometimes it feels like if I had been better, maybe Dad wouldn't. I was crying as I pulled him closer and held him. He resisted at first but then surrendered to the embrace, burying his face in my shoulder. I told him, listen to me. I'm not going to stop until you hear me. Your father's choices were his own. You are and always have been more than enough. His leaving had nothing to do with you. He nodded slowly and relaxed into the embrace. I felt that familiar warmth again, a mix of relief, affection, and an undeniable sense of connection. The bond between us, once defined by the roles of mother and son, seemed to be shifting and evolving into something new. I wasn't sure where this newfound intimacy would lead us, but I knew that life as we had known it was changing, and this was just the beginning. I lay there in the dark, wrapped up in the warmth of my son's embrace. I had a sudden realization. The balance of our relationship was shifting, teetering on the edge of something new and uncharted. I felt a little nervous, a hint of uncertainty about what this transformation might mean for us. But there was also a sense of excitement, like this was just the beginning of a journey into the unknown. When dawn arrived, it came gently. The soft tendrils of sunlight were weaving their way through the curtains, rousing me from slumber. Daniel was sleeping peacefully, his face serene and relaxed. The burdens of the previous night seemed to have been forgotten. I watched him for a moment, my heart swelling with a familiar maternal love. Yet beneath that well-known affection, a different current stirred. I couldn't quite define it. It was the same unfamiliar feeling that had danced at the edges of my awareness the night before. It was a sensation that both intrigued and unsettled me. I was a bit unsettled, so I got out of bed carefully so as not to wake Daniel and made my way downstairs to the breakfast routine I was used to. As I stood at the stove, I was flipping pancakes with practiced ease, but my thoughts were drifting back to our late-night conversation. Daniel had always been a sensitive soul, but I hadn't grasped the depth of his internal struggle. He had carried the weight of his father's absence, the guilt he harbored, and a secret he had kept hidden for far too long. I'd been thinking about it for too long, but there was more to it than that. I could see a change in him, in the way he'd sought comfort in my arms and a longing for closeness that went beyond the usual boundaries of mother and son. If I was honest with myself, I'd felt it too, a warmth that spread through me when I held him and a comfort that went beyond maternal instinct. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. He's just a boy. I reminded myself he was my son, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Daniel finally emerged from his slumber, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His hair was tousled, a picture of youthful innocence. But there was a newfound maturity in his gaze, a hint of the man he was becoming. I greeted him with a warm smile, attempting to mask the lingering emotions from the night before. "Morning, sleepyhead," I chirped, placing a plate of golden pancakes before him. "Morning," he mumbled, settling into. He sat down at the table and started eating his breakfast. We ate in comfortable silence, the morning sunlight bathing the kitchen in a warm glow. I could feel his eyes on me occasionally, but I remained silent, not ready to delve into the complexities of the previous night's revelations. He seemed more at ease and like himself, and I didn't want to disrupt the fragile peace we had found. Finally, he broke the silence. His voice was laced with gratitude. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that." His vulnerability surprised me. "You never have to thank me, Daniel." I reassured him. "I'll always be there for you, no matter what." He nodded, but his gaze lingered, a silent question in his eyes, a mirror of the unspoken emotions I had been grappling with. His eyes held a depth and intensity that transcended the familiar comfort of our mother-son bond. The day unfolded uneventfully. Daniel retreated to his room, immersed in homework and video games, while I busied myself with household chores. Yet there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere between us. It was an intangible change, a quiet tension, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the deeper connection that had emerged as the day transitioned into evening. My thoughts returned to Daniel, to his transformation from boy to young man, and to the closeness we had shared the night before. The more I pondered, the more I realized that my feelings for him had evolved, transcending the boundaries of maternal love. That evening after dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. The room was dimly lit. The flickering images on the screen cast dancing shadows across the walls. We were mostly silent, content in each other's presence, but as the movie progressed, I became acutely aware of his proximity. The way his arm brushed against mine with each subtle shift made my heart quicken, and I tried to focus on the film, but the tension between us was palpable. It was like a silent symphony of unspoken emotions. Halfway through the movie, Daniel shifted closer, his arm pressing against mine. This time, he didn't move away. The warmth of his skin against mine sent a shiver of awareness through me. I glanced at him, and our eyes met. His gaze was filled with a newfound intensity, a reflection of the emotions I had been trying to suppress all day without conscious thought. I reached out and took his hand, our fingers intertwining. He didn't resist, instead squeezing my hand gently. His thumb traced a slow circle on my skin, and the simple gesture sent a flutter through my heart. It was a sensation that was both familiar and exhilaratingly new. We sat like that for a while, hands clasped in the dim light. It was a silent testament to the shifting dynamics of our relationship. It was a turning point, a moment of unspoken understanding that transcended the boundaries of our familial roles. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that things were changing. Dan was no longer just my son, he was someone I cared for in a way that defied definition. The movie ended, but we remained on the couch, the credits rolling unnoticed. I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. It was a small gesture, yet it felt profoundly intimate. It was a silent acknowledgement of the connection that was blossoming between us. "Mom," Daniel whispered. His voice was barely audible. I lay there in the darkness, wrapped up in the warmth of my son's embrace. It was a profound realization. The delicate balance of our relationship was shifting, teetering on the precipice of something new and uncharted. I felt a tremor of apprehension, a whisper of uncertainty about what this transformation might mean for us. But amidst the apprehension, there was an undeniable sense of anticipation. I recognized that this was merely the beginning of a journey into the unknown. Dawn arrived with a gentle insistence. The soft tendrils of sunlight weaving their way through the curtains roused me from slumber. Daniel slept peacefully, his face serene and relaxed. It seemed as though the burdens of the previous night had been forgotten. I watched him for a moment, my heart swelling with a familiar maternal love. Yet beneath that well-known affection, a different current stirred. I couldn't quite define it, but it was the same unfamiliar feeling that had danced at the edges of my awareness the night before. It was a sensation that both intrigued and... I got up and went downstairs to make breakfast. I was still thinking about our conversation from last night. Daniel is a sensitive guy, but I didn't realize how much he was struggling. He was dealing with his dad being gone, feeling guilty, and keeping a secret for a long time. I'd been thinking about this for a while, but there was more to it than that. I could see a change in him, in the way he'd sought comfort in my arms and a longing for closeness that went beyond what you'd expect from a mother and son. If I'm being honest, I'd felt it too, a warmth when I held him, a comfort that went beyond maternal instinct. but I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. Ichike was just a boy, I reminded myself. Your son, but I still had this feeling. It wouldn't go away. Daniel finally woke up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His hair was all messy, like he'd been sleeping for a while. But there was a new maturity in his gaze, like he was becoming a man. I greeted him with a warm smile, trying to hide the emotions from the night before. Morning, sleepyhead, I said, putting a plate of golden pancakes in front of him. He mumbled, getting into his chair, and he ate his breakfast eagerly, and we ate in comfortable silence, the morning sunlight bathing the kitchen in a warm glow. I could feel his eyes on me occasionally, but I remained silent, not ready to delve into the complexities of the previous night's revelations. He seemed more at ease, more like himself, and I didn't want to disrupt the fragile peace we had found. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice laced with gratitude. Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that. His vulnerability surprised me. You never. I've got to thank you, Daniel. I told him I'd always be there for him, no matter what. He nodded, but his gaze lingered with a silent question, mirroring the unspoken emotions I'd been grappling with. His eyes held a depth and intensity that transcended the familiar comfort of our mother's son. The day unfolded uneventfully. Daniel retreated to his room, immersed in homework and video games, while I busied myself with household chores. Yet the atmosphere. There was a subtle shift between us. It was an intangible change, a quiet tension, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the deeper connection that had emerged as the day transitioned into evening. My thoughts returned to Daniel and his transformation from boy to young man, and the closeness we had shared the night before. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my feelings for him had evolved, transcending the boundaries of maternal love. That evening after dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. The room was dimly lit. We were watching a movie together, the room was dimly lit, and the images on the screen cast dancing shadows across the walls. We were mostly silent, but as the movie progressed, I became acutely aware of his proximity. The way his arm brushed against mine with each subtle shift made my heart quicken, and I tried to focus on the film, but the tension between us was palpable. It was like a silent symphony of unspoken emotions. Midway through the movie, Daniel shifted closer, his arm pressing against mine. This time, he didn't. I felt his warmth against mine, and it sent a shiver of awareness through me. I glanced at him, and our eyes met. His gaze was filled with a newfound intensity, a reflection of the emotions I had been trying to suppress all day. Without conscious thought, I reached out and took his hand. Our fingers intertwined, and he didn't resist. Instead, he squeezed my hand gently, his thumb tracing a slow circle on my skin. The simple gesture sent a flutter through my heart. It was a sensation that was both familiar and new. It was exhilaratingly new. We sat like that for a while, hands clasped in the dim light, a silent testament to the shifting dynamics of our relationship. It was a turning point, a moment of unspoken understanding that transcended the boundaries of our familial roles. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that things were changing. Daniel was no longer just my son, he was someone I cared for in a way that defied definition. The movie ended, but we remained on there. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. It was a small gesture, yet it felt profoundly intimate. It was a silent acknowledgement of the connection that was blossoming between us. "Mom," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yeah, I'm really glad you're here." His words were simple yet profound, echoing the sentiment in my own heart. I was glad he was here too, glad for this unexpected closeness, this newfound understanding. The intimacy was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was the first time in what felt like forever that I felt truly alive. There was no confusion or guilt, it was just the pure, undeniable truth of our love. It was a love born from years of shared experiences of trust and understanding that ran deeper than blood. It was a love that felt as natural as breathing and inevitable as the sunrise. We lay there in the aftermath of our shared passion, the silence punctuated only by the soft rhythm of our breaths. Daniel, he finally pulled back his eyes and searched mine with a warmth that melted my heart. He asked, "Are we okay?" His voice was gentle and soothing in the darkness. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My heart was overflowing with emotions that defied words. "Yeah," I whispered, my voice thick with unspoken truths. "We're okay." Later that night, after the remnants of dinner were cleared away and the house settled into a peaceful quietude, Daniel and I found ourselves on the back porch, enveloped by the tranquility of the night. Air was crisp and cool, with stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across the vast canvas of the sky. It had been weeks since I'd felt this way. I felt a sense of release, a lifting of the weight that had been pressing down on me. We didn't speak much, but words were unnecessary. Simply being near him, sharing the quiet beauty of the night, was enough. There was no urgency, no pressure. Just a comfortable silence that spoke volumes. Whatever this was between us, it was unfolding organically, and I was content. He let me do my own thing, and it was great. He reached for my hand, and I could feel the warmth of his touch spread through me like wildfire. I smiled, squeezing his hand gently, and we sat there, fingers intertwined, bathed in the soft glow of the starlight. It was a love that defied definition, a connection that transcended the boundaries of our familial roles. In that moment, under the vast expanse of the night sky, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. As the days turned into weeks, we grew closer. It became part of our daily lives. We didn't need to label it or define it. It was simply there, in the way our eyes met and in the long touches we shared in quiet moments. We created a world that was just for us. With each passing day, our connection grew stronger and more tangible. The conflict I had initially felt dissolved. It was replaced by a sense of rightness. It felt like this was meant to be. I knew I was meant to be with Daniel. He was no longer just my son, he was my partner, my confidant, my lover. Our relationship had blossomed into something beautiful and fulfilling. It was a need we hadn't even realized we had. It wasn't until a rainy afternoon in late autumn that I fully realized the depth of our love. The sky was a canvas of stormy grays, and the rain was drumming a steady rhythm against the windows. Daniel and I were curled up on the couch. In the living room, a fire was crackling in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. We were wrapped in a blanket, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the intimacy of our closeness, creating a haven from the storm outside. Daniel was leaning against me, his head resting on my shoulder, and I absently ran my fingers through his hair, savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment. The rain streaked the windows, blurring the outside world and creating a sense of seclusion, as if we were in our own little universe. I could feel his breathing slow and steady, and I knew without a word that he was feeling the same shift in our connection and the same pull towards something more profound. He lifted his head and his eyes met mine, and in that moment, the truth of our love resonated between us. It wasn't just love, it was a bond that transcended the traditional roles we had played. It was a connection that had evolved into something deeper and undeniable. I waited for him to continue, knowing that whatever he was about to say would change everything. "I love you," he confessed, his hand reaching out to take mine. "It wasn't just because you're my mom, but because of who you are. Everything about you. I don't know if that's okay or if it's wrong, but I can't help it." His words washed over me like a warm wave, filling the room with a love that made my heart ache in the most beautiful way. I'd sensed his feelings, but hearing him voice them and acknowledge the depth of his emotions made it all the more real. I squeezed his hand, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my fingertips. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. I love you too. I've always loved you, but this is different. He nodded, his eyes searching mine for reassurance and an answer to the unspoken question that hung between us. I don't know what this means. I continued, but I know that I feel the same way, and it doesn't feel wrong to me. It feels right. A soft smile touched his lips, and my heart swelled with joy. I'm glad you feel that way. He whispered, I don't know what I'd do if you didn't. I reached up and caressed his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips. We'll figure this out, I reassured him. For a moment, our eyes met, and the only sounds were the gentle patter of rain and the crackling of the fire. We didn't need to say anything, we'd already said everything that needed to be said. We both knew what we felt, and we both knew it was real. It was undeniable. Slowly, Daniel leaned in, never leaving my eyes, and gently, hesitantly, he kissed me. It was a soft, tender kiss filled with all the love and longing we'd been holding back for so long. There was no urgency, no. It was a rush, pure and simple. It was a moment of deep connection. When he pulled back, his eyes were filled with emotion. I knew that we had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. Instead of fear, I felt a sense of peace. I felt certain that this was where we were meant to be. He pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around me. We held each other as the rain continued to fall. The fire cast a warm glow over our embrace. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would. We spent the rest of the evening cuddling, chatting, and kissing. We didn't talk about the future or the implications of our new relationship. All that mattered was the present. We were in each other's company, enjoying the shared intimacy of that moment, as the rain continued to fall gently. I was amazed at how quickly our relationship had changed. Daniel had grown from a boy into a man, and in doing so, our bond had evolved into something unexpected, something beautiful that fit us perfectly. That night, Daniel came over. I went back to my room, but this time I didn't hesitate. He climbed into bed beside me, his arms wrapping around me and holding me close. It wasn't the comforting embrace of a mother and son, it was the embrace of lovers, two souls intertwined. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a symphony of love and contentment. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. I hadn't felt this complete in years. Whatever this was, whatever it had become, I was ready for it. Daniel and I had always been close, but now we were something more, something that defied definition. We were partners, lovers, two souls bound by a love that transcended the boundaries of convention. As I drifted off to sleep, a smile curved my lips. It was crazy, I knew, but it felt amazing.